conversation this evening happens at a critical time for the Palestinian people and for the Palestinian cause. Israeli plans to annex Palestinian lands commencing on July the 1st are in breach of international law, and these plans must be stopped. It's time now for the global community to stand up for the rights of self-determination, to stand up for democratic rights, for human rights, to stand up for Palestinian rights. So we all have a part to play. We all have an obligation now to raise our voices collectively as we say that international law must be respected, that the state of Palestine must be established and respected, and that Palestinian rights are human rights. We stand with them.
Shewer Maha Kharja, you're all very welcome to this live online broadcast hosted by Sinn Féin this evening, entitled Oppose the Annexation, Voices from Palestine. My name's Declan Kearney. I'm the National Chairperson of Sinn Féin and the MLA for South Antrim. And I'm also coincidentally a member of the power sharing government in the north of Ireland. But tonight I'm hosting a conversation with three leaders of the Palestinian struggle. We have Uri Davis, who is of Fatah's Revolutionary Council. We have Bassem Naim, who is a former health minister and the head of the International Bureau of Hamas. And he is speaking to us from Gaza, and also coming to us from the West Bank, from the occupied territories tonight is Mustafa Barghouti, who is a former Minister of Information, and who is also the leader of the Palestinian National Initiative. Uri and Mustafa, you're all very welcome. We are delighted to have you involved with our broadcast tonight. And we look forward to you sharing your perspectives with us this evening. Our audience will be largely from Ireland, but I hope others who are watching this broadcast from abroad, internationally. And we hope to hear your experiences, your perspectives, and become informed and educated as a result. So I'm going to begin the broadcast by inviting, in the first instance, our comrade Uri Davis to speak a little about himself, his work, and then we will hear introductory contributions from Bassem Naim and then also from Mustafa Barghouti. So Uri, please tell us a little about yourself, your work and struggle.
Well, I have a PhD in anthropology. I'm an anti-Zionist Palestinian of Jewish origin. Spent the better part of my life dividing my time as a human rights defender and as academic researcher and erstwhile university teacher. I focus my political work, my human rights defense work, on the question of Palestine for a rather simple reason. I'm a citizen of an apartheid state called the State of Israel. The crimes against humanity and the war crimes perpetrated by the apartheid government of Israel are, just by the strength of being a citizen of that state, are perpetrated in my name. So for the better part of my adult life, I stepped forward to the front line, raised my hand as high as I could, and my voice as loud as I can, basically saying these crimes are perpetrated not in my name. I am a citizen of apartheid Israel and of a alleged democratic monarchy, the United Kingdom and Northern Ireland. And the same applies to my British citizenship, except that I, as an anti-Zionist Palestinian, I am not likely to get an academic job in the state of Israel, an apartheid state. And I got my first academic appointment in the United Kingdom. Spent the subsequent 20 years there as a researcher and university teacher. As a citizen of the UK, I have the right of abode in the UK and the right of work without permit in the UK. And it is in the UK that I joined, I was invited by the late founding leader of the PLO, the assassinated President Yasser Arafat, to join the PLO, and my second in command, the late Abu Jihad Khalil al to join the Fatah and appointed as director of Fatah office in London. I was able to depart from the United Kingdom back into the territory of historical Palestine on the back of the Oslo Accords. The Oslo Accords, on a de facto basis, legal de facto basis, rendered the PLO, previously classified as a terrorist organization by apartheid Israel, as a de facto legal organization. And the PLO and all factions affiliated to the PLO are now de facto legal bodies, not only in Jericho, Gaza, and Ramallah, but also in Haifa, Jaffa, and Beersheba. I returned as an anti-Zionist citizen of an apartheid state to the home of my sister in Kfar Shmaliau, Herzliya region, Sabri Jaris, a Palestinian Arab citizen of the apartheid state, to his home village in Fasuta, and Imad Shakur, likewise a Palestinian Arab citizen of Israel, and a patriot like Sabri, and I believe like myself, returned to his home village in Sakhnin. What else can I say? I describe myself as an anti-Zionist Palestinian of Jewish origin, born in Jerusalem in 1943. And I am of Jewish origin, but not Jewish. Prior to the registration of my marriage, I stood before a Sharia court and declared my Islam. And in these various identities and areas, cultural and political areas, I add the bit of my weight, no more than a grain, on the scale of the right and the good in situations where the scales are wavering, quite often adding a grain decides the balance. And that's what I've been doing as a member of Fatah and a member of the PLO.
Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to have you speak with us tonight from the occupied territories in the West Bank. I'm now going to turn to Basim. Marhaba, Basim.
أهلا وسهلا.
Please tell us a little about yourself. Tell us a little about yourself and your work.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Declan. And first of all, I want to thank you to invite me for this very interesting online meeting and at this very special and very sensitive time in our struggle and our cause, especially from Ireland. I am Basim Naim. I born in Gaza in 1963. I grown up in Gaza City, graduated from Germany as a doctor in medicine. Then I was specialized in surgery in Amman from the Islamic Hospital in Amman, and worked later for around 6 years in governmental hospital as a I'm married with 9 children. When one of them was killed in 2003 by Israeli forces, invaded Gaza, the east of Gaza City. He was 18 years old at that time. The other one, in the same incident, he was seriously injured, and until now he is suffering of sciatic nerve injury, which is causing him very, very painful days and nights. But unfortunately, we cannot do anything to help him. We have tried the maximum we can but it was useless. Then in 2006, I became the Minister of Health in Palestine for around 1 year. And in the unity government, which is called the 11th government, in 2007, I became Minister of Youth and Sport. Then later on, I was responsible for different ministries, Minister of Prisoners, Minister of, beside Minister of Youth and Sport and Minister of Health. I was for 1 year responsible for the Minister of Prisoners and the Information Office, which was called later on the Governmental Information Office. After 2014, I left the government fully, and I am started working only for the movement. I mean, for Hamas, mainly in the area of international relations and international media. And now I am working as a member of the movement in the Bureau for International Relations, and at the same time, I'm also responsible for the file of information, international media office in the movement. I am living now in the biggest open air prison, which is called Gaza Strip, where around 2 million people now for more than 14 years kept hostages under strict siege from the Israeli siege. And unfortunately, this siege is imposed by the Israelis, but also by international support directly or indirectly. And I can see that it is really a very tough life here in Gaza. And I'm sure all those friends and comrades, Dr. Mustafa and maybe Uri, I don't know if he visited Gaza during this time. It is extremely difficult to live in Gaza, where you cannot be sure of anything. You cannot be sure of, it is really difficult, but we have no other choice. The only choice for Palestinians in Gaza and also in other areas is to continue resisting the occupation, steadfastness, unity, and working to fulfill our dreams of independence, freedom, and dignity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bassam. At this point, as you join us, you're doing so during a power cut, and this broadcast and your participation is relying upon use of batteries. So yes, thank you for your forbearance and for participating in these circumstances. I want to then introduce our third contributor this evening, who is Mustafa Barghouti. Mustafa, to explain for our audience, is currently travelling in a car back to his residence. He has just left the wake house of one of his comrades, a young man, Ahmed Erekat, who was assassinated just in the last 24 hours. And I would ask that Mustafa explain something about Ahmed's killing, as well as introducing himself. And then we will have a broader conversation about prevailing conditions on the ground, both on the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, and also in Gaza. Mustafa, you're very welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry I have to speak like this for the time being till we reach home. But as you said, we were in Abu Dis, where we attended to the family of Ahmed Erekat, our comrade, who was a young, wonderful man. I knew him very well. He participated so many times in our popular resistance activities. He was 27 years old. Yesterday, he was trying to attend to the wedding of his own sister. And his sister and the family were already waiting for him and beginning to celebrate her wedding, when he was shot and assassinated in a ruthless manner by the Israeli army for no reason. The Israeli army tried to claim that he tried to attack them, but all the witnesses show very clearly that he did not have to be killed. And they killed him on purpose. They shot him several times and finished him. And he was preparing for his own wedding in September, as a matter of fact. He's not the only Palestinian who was killed in this ruthless manner recently. During the coronavirus pandemic, we have lost more than 10 Palestinians in one way or another. One of the worst killings that happened was to Iyad Halak in Jerusalem, who was an autistic man. An autistic young man who, as you know, because he suffered from autism, he was very scared when the army called on him. And he ran away and they shot him and killed him. They shot him several times as well, for no reason. I mean, and that might be important to say here that our struggle in Palestine is not only a national liberation struggle for freedom, it's also a struggle against racism, against the worst form of apartheid that ever existed, a much worse apartheid, as my friend Rooney Casrils from South Africa used to say when he visited us. It's a much worse apartheid than what prevailed in South Africa. And that's why our struggle today is against Israeli occupation, but also it's against apartheid and racism in all of Palestine, not just in the occupied Palestinian territories. And that's the struggle we are devoting our life to. I am an ordinary Palestinian. I was born in Jerusalem, and I was educated in medicine, like my colleague, Dr. Bassem. We're both physicians. I am an internist, cardiologist. I worked for 15 years after I graduated in Maqasid Hospital, Islamic Maqasid Hospital in Jerusalem. And since 2005, I am forbidden from entering Jerusalem. In 2005, I ran for president in Palestine, and I was the runner-up in the elections. And forbid me from entering the city where I was born and where my sister lives. And this is a very small example of what Palestinians suffer from. I'm not exceptional here. About 90% of Palestinians are forbidden from reaching Jerusalem. As a matter of fact, the 2 million Palestinians in Gaza are forbidden from reaching West Bank. And we are forbidden from going to Gaza. Dr. Bassem remembers that when I visited them during the war in 2014, I had to fly to go to Jordan, fly to Egypt, and then cross Sinai. Today, a trip like that takes three days instead of 1.5 hours. So the system of racial discrimination we are subjected to is very severe. I was politically active since I was a young student. I opened my eyes on the struggle against occupation and oppression. And since then, I've been active in several ways. In 2002, I founded with the well-known Dr. Haidar Abd al-Shafi, who is perceived always as one of the most decent Palestinian leaders. With him and with Dr. Edward Said and Ibrahim Daqqaq, and many and hundreds of other leaders, we founded the Palestinian National Initiative, which is one of the Palestinian groups that are struggling against occupation, that believes in freedom for Palestinians, in a real democracy that should prevail in Palestine, internal democracy, and that works and struggles very hard for social justice. I'm an advocate of popular resistance, in which I have participated constantly during the last 20 years. And I'm an advocate of internal Palestinian unity. And we've played an important role, I think, in several times in bringing our friends and brothers in Fatah and Hamas together. And the best example of that was the National Unity Government, which unfortunately did not survive for more than 3 months because of conspiracies against it. It's my hope and my wish that one day we will see a unified Palestinian leadership that could lead our struggle, and I consider it one of the most important elements today. Finally, maybe I should mention that I was injured 9 times during these years by the Israeli army. I don't carry any internal resentment, but I mean, one of the cases was in 1996, actually. I was shot twice with live ammunition while I was treating an injured person. But that gives you an idea of the Israeli army and how it behaves. And I was lucky in a way. We had people who lost their lives, like Razan Najjar, a fantastic young woman who was dead when she was shot and killed, or like our other colleague in Bethlehem, who was shot also and killed. He was only 17 years old. I'll stop here, and then we can talk maybe more later.
Absolutely, Mustafa, and thank you for that presentation, and our deepest sympathies to you and the PNA and to the family especially of Ahmed, who has been assassinated at this time. And we very much appreciate the fact that you are joining us, despite the fact that you and other comrades are dealing with this very tragic situation. There are so many parallels to be drawn between the experience of the Palestinian people and our experience of repression here in Ireland. And in fact, I've just written an article on the current situation in Palestine, and then I began that article by referencing the killing of young Ihad al-Halak in the old city of Jerusalem. I want to now, we've so much to talk about and so little time. What I would like to do is to come back to you, Basim, and then to you, Uri, to get some sense of the current situation on the ground, building on what Mustafa has just described. Tell us, Basim, about the current situation in Gaza for the people who are living there in social and economic terms, please.
Thank you very much. I will start with the pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, which is started in Palestine generally and in Gaza beginning of March this year. But this pandemic we have to fight against within the context of a 14 years of Israeli siege. What does it mean? Palestinians, men and women and children. By the way, Gaza Strip is only 365 kilometers, square kilometers, where 2 million people are living in. 55% of those people are below 16, are children. When we talk about 30 years, around 70% are below 30 years. 14 years of siege, it means around 45 to 50% unemployment rate, 85% people are living below poverty line, 80 to 85% are depending on international food aid from outside. Students lost their studying places, or many patients along these years because they were not able to leave Gaza Strip. These are only examples. You have since 2006, the Israelis in June 2006 attacked the only power generating plant in Gaza, and since that time, we didn't have any electricity. All the time, 8 hours, 6 hours, sometimes 2 hours in 24 hours, you have only electricity. And you can imagine what does it mean? What does this mean for economy, for the daily life of people, for households, for schools, for education, and so on and so on. It means most of the sewage pumping machines and machineries, most of the time are not functioning. Therefore, most of the sewage water is pumped into the sea. Therefore, 95% of the Gaza Sea is not suitable for swimming. It is what we call polluted.
Yes.
95% to 97% of Gaza water is undrinkable. It's not consumable by a human being. Because, as I said, you are under strict siege, and most of the needs of Gaza is under strict Israeli control. Therefore, they can, for any reason, say that this is W's item, which mean it can be used for military cause and civil cause, and therefore it is not allowed. It is not allowed to enter Gaza. Hundreds of items are not available. You cannot get it into Gaza, and therefore hundreds of factories, companies, workshops are closed because they cannot work because of absence of electricity, because absence of spare parts, and so on and so on. Therefore, this pandemic, we have to fight against it at the time or in the context of 14 years inhuman siege, unjust siege. And when we talk about the biggest open air prison or the new ghetto, or it is not our description. This is the description of international organization. This is the description of even some Israeli human rights defenders who describe Gaza as a ghetto for 2 million people. About 14 years, which mean that any child who at that time was 6 years old, now he is 20. I mean, a generation as a whole is only knowing siege and oppression and aggression all the time, which we call it. They were able to create the mentality of siege. And I can only tell you one example, that my son was watching with me TV, and he noticed that the man from Turkey, every time when he is talking on TV on Al Jazeera, he has electricity in the background. And he asked me, is there any country around the world who have electricity 24 hours? He cannot imagine it, that electricity is available 24 hours. You can imagine what does it mean for a generation to be besieged for 20 years. It means isolation. It means disappointment. It means frustration. It means narrow-minded even people who cannot see any options in the future. Therefore, it is really very, very aggressive to live here in Gaza. During this time, before, I mean, the COVID-19 pandemic, we have witnessed at least 3 big Israeli aggressions and at least another 10 small, what so-called military operations. One in 2008-9, 2012, and 2014. And each time, thousands of Palestinians were either killed or seriously injured, amputated, disabled, thousands of houses demolished fully. And unfortunately, the deputy minister today of Israel, prime minister of Israel today, Benny Gantz, he was proud in his election campaign that he was able to bring Gaza Strip 20,000 years back in the Stone Age. He was proud that he was killing Palestinians, that he was destroying their homes. Therefore, when we got this, when we have to fight against this pandemic, it was really we were very, very worried about how can we do it. You could talk about nearly collapsing health system, a very collapsing psychosocial conditions, very fragile economy. Even big countries, not only Gaza Strip or Palestine or the West Bank, big countries were not able to cope or to fight this very aggressive pandemic. But despite of this, and thanks very strict and harsh procedures and taken by the governmental authorities here in Gaza, by closing the borders, isolating anyone who is coming into Gaza in a medical quarantine, closing the mosques, closing the wedding halls, universities, schools, all the public activities. Until now, thanks Allah and these harsh procedures and activities, we don't have the virus spread publicly. It is only confined to the quarantine, and it is only limited to came side, mainly from Egypt, and part of them from. We have around 70 to 80 positive cases, but at the same time, we cannot be 100% sure that we don't have the virus inside Gaza. And if we have, God forbid, the virus spread into the cities, it will be a real catastrophe, because to take about social distancing and social isolation and quarantine, it will be impossible. You have only one example: beach camp, beach refugee camp. You have 100,000 Palestinians in 1 square kilometer. I mean, how can you do a quarantine or medical quarantine in such a situation? And this is in different refugee camps. Therefore, Gaza is one of the mostly populated areas on earth. You have here in Gaza around 5,500 people per square kilometer. It is impossible to deal with a pandemic when it, God again forbid, it will happen inside Gaza. Until now, the procedures are very successful, despite very limited resources, very fragile situation. Unfortunately, we have heard a lot from the international community about Gaza and the seriousness of the situation in Gaza, but we got the very minimal, minimal aid from outside, which is really cannot help if the pandemic will happen inside the cities.
Thank you, Basim. You've painted a very graphic picture of how difficult life is in Gaza for all of its citizens, particularly young people. I was very struck by your point around your son, never having had the experience of knowing what it is like to have 24 hours a day electricity. I'd like to turn to you, Uri, because the description that Basim has shared with us of the siege then transfers into a very, very stark situation in the West Bank, where Palestinian people are forced to live under very, very stringent controls. Free movement is limited. There are many checkpoints. You might want to explain to us a little about areas A, B, and C, and the degree to which the military checkpoints and the annexation wall impinges on ordinary citizens' lives. Could you tell us a little about that, please?
I believe I am able to do so, but please allow me a brief introductory meeting. You see, I tried to keep to the initial deadline of 2-3 minutes of personal introduction. And given the fact that I limited myself to that time frame, I did not say something that I ought to have said or been allowed by the time frame to have said. I'm a member of Fatah, as you properly said, and within Fatah, I'm Deputy Commissioner General with the Fatah International Relations Commission. The Commissioner General is Fatah Central Committee member Rawhi Fatouh. And within my duties in the Commission, I'm responsible for the Africa desk, which is basically a continent representing over 50 states, meaning over 50 votes in the United Nations General Assembly. Previous to that, I served as Director of Fatah office in London by appointment of Abu Jihad, the assassinated deputy leader of Fatah, Khalil al-Wazir. And I projected myself as an academic. I should have said that my specific skills are as an anthropologist, and I focused my work specifically not researching the Palestinian people. I focused myself specifically researching the apartheid legislation mechanism of the apartheid state, and specifically the apartheid government, the Knesset of the State of Israel, the mechanism and the legal instrument used in order to ethnically cleanse and colonize the Palestinian people. The basic conflict is between the colonizer and the colonized, between the colonized people of Palestine, the Palestinian Arab people, and the colonizer being the population defined in law by Israel as Jewish. Having said that, I want to address your suggestion immediately, but do it from my particular angle and not in comparison to Gaza. Gaza situation is, as properly described, an open space, an open air prison. Life conditions that there are criminally against humanity, and the people perpetrating that crime ought to be brought before international legal fora and and adjudicated as war criminals. The situation in the West Bank, where I'm speaking from, is in some important respects different, and I would like to compare it specifically in case of the corona pandemic to the situation in Jerusalem and in Israel. In the West Bank, we have a rather efficient government led by Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh. And it is amusing to see the reports of international community and international health authorities complimenting the Palestinian Authority for the expert and efficient way it has handled the crisis of the corona epidemic. Definitely much better and a higher standard of efficiency than the situation of the enemy, the situation inside apartheid Israel, claiming to be the better progressive quote unquote state in the area. And likewise, in Jerusalem, the occupied East Jerusalem is placed directly under the boot of the Israeli occupation and the Jerusalem apartheid municipality, and the situation there is in every sense, in cultural, medical, teaching and organizational sense, absolutely desperate, precisely because it is directly under the boot of the Israeli occupation. In Jerusalem, there is no buffer, however weak a buffer, there is no buffer of the Palestinian Authority to defend the people between a bit, at least to a measure, against the cruelty of the occupation. So in the West Bank, I believe the situation is under much better control and administration and management led by the PA government relative to Jerusalem and Israel. And let me illustrate the difference by a situation of which I was a present. We had a visit by an international a representative of an international charity arriving in Ramallah, and we honored him properly at the commission, and of course wanted to treat him for a meal. And we took him to a rather posh restaurant in Ramallah, the roof of an apartment block. And the chef was there serving at international five-star level and so forth and so on. The gentleman went to the veranda of that restaurant and said, you know, looking at Ramallah from this vantage point, it is hard to believe that Ramallah is under occupation. Now, this situation has two interpretations. One interpretation, which I believe is misguided, is it's a Zionist propaganda interpretation, is that the Israeli occupation, at least of the West Bank, is sort of benign. and allows a margin of situations like this to take place. The other interpretation, which I believe is the correct interpretation, is that the Israeli occupation wants and would like to destroy Palestinian middle class. But Palestinian Sumud and Palestinian leadership defeat that intention. And it is to the credit of the Palestinian people and Palestinian Sumud and the wisdom of the Palestinian leadership that this is the current situation, and the situation in the West Bank is not as atrocious as in Jerusalem, and definitely not as atrocious and criminal and ugly as in Gaza. Having said that, I also need another qualification, and that is that I'm privileged to represent my movement here, Fatah, the Palestinian Movement for National Liberation. But I want to raise a distinction. I'm not an official spokesperson of Fatah. I now represent Fatah on this platform, but I'm not an official spokesman of Fatah. And those of you who are familiar with diplomatic niceties would immediately appreciate the distinction. Now that the middle class has managed to survive to at least to a degree that allows an international visitor to say it's difficult to believe that there is an occupation in Ramallah, I want to, in this framework, namely the success of the Palestinian people and the sumud, the staying power of the Palestinian people in resisting the destruction of Palestinian middle class life completely. I want to say that in that context, the check post, the restriction of travel, and all other occupation limitations are extremely damaging, and damaging to Palestinian economy, damaging to Palestinian social, cultural, and intellectual life. And you have to visit the country and meet the people concerned in order to appreciate the obstacle against which Palestinian ingenuity is, in a way, breaking through. Palestinian ingenuity in music, Palestinian ingenuity in theater, Palestinian ingenuity in medicine is resisting that suppression, at least so far, quite remarkably. The best the best teacher worldwide was given the honors of the best teachers worldwide is a Palestinian from the West Bank. All these are forms of resistance. To my reading, of course, I'm a member of Fatah due to the wisdom of my leadership and due to the expertise of the Prime Minister Mohammed Shtayyeh and his government. I need to say something additional. Give me a minute, please, to correct my thought. The critical question of dispute, of conflict, of the 100 years conflict between the colonizer and the colonized, between political Zionist settler colonial movement and the indigenous people of Palestine, is the question of sovereignty. Now, the PLO is the representative of the Palestinian people, and the Palestine National Council is the highest body within the PLO. I happen to be also a member of the Palestine National Council. And the Palestine National Council in 1974 put together a program known as the 10-point program. 10-point program basically says that we can defeat the enemy. We are sure to defeat the enemy. There's no doubt that the enemy, namely apartheid Israel, has no future in Palestine. But given the international balance of power, given the regional balance of power, we can do so by points rather than by knockout, if to use the analogy to the boxing arena. And hence the 10 points program suggests that it is possible to defeat the enemy by progression of stages. To my reading, the Oslo Accords is one of the stages in the revolutionary journey towards liberation of Palestine from Israeli apartheid. And at the center of this journey is the question not of the right of Palestinian return, but the implementation of the right of Palestinian return. All Palestinian families, all Palestinian internally displaced persons inside Israel have the legal right and struggle for the implementation of the right of return to all areas in historical Palestine out of which they have been forcibly expelled, out of which they have been ethically extended, and people have property rights. People have Ottoman and British mandate documents identifying specific properties which they own. To my reading, the mainstream of the settler colonial population identified as Jewish inside Israel are illegal occupiers of properties that do not belong to them. Illegal occupiers of properties that do not belong to them are known by the English term squatters.
And Uri, at that point, what I want to do, because you have set the context of, I think very well, the current annexation plans, because what you describe as the Great Nakba of 48 and then the further annexations of 67, I'd like us to now turn our focus to the planned annexation of the 1st of July. Let
me articulate the linchpin to which I'm about to arrive.
Time is short, so please be brief.
I will be brief. The linchpin is that the conflict is the question, focus on the right of return. And at present, as we all know, the intention of the Israeli government to annex more and more of the occupied West Bank. Now, that could be and probably will be a watershed situation. In the process of moving from stage to stage towards liberation, we now have an international recognized state of Palestine. And the Israeli policies of occupation and incremental annexation directly to the state of Palestine should be recognized as an invasion of the state of Palestine. An invasion of the state of Palestine is violation of Chapter 7 of United Nations Charter. In your introductory comments, you said, what can we do in Ireland and beyond in order to defend the rights of the Palestinian people? At the top of the priorities should be obtaining international recognition of the state of Palestine and international condemnation of Israeli invasion of the state of Palestine, the application of Chapter 7 of UN Charter, and the application of the 1973 international binding covenant on the suppression and punishment of the crime of apartheid on the apartheid state of Israel, with international sanctions that go together with that. That is the best contribution that Ireland and the EU and the international community can give at this point, if they wish, first of all, in order to block Israeli government intentions of incremental further occupation, and in the second step, towards the liberation of the country as a whole.
Thank you. Thank you, Uri. That's very well put. And leaving that point and moving to yourself, Mustafa, can you set out for us what are the implications of the proposed annexation, how far-reaching it is going to be, and what are the repercussions for the Palestinian struggle and for the lives of Palestinian citizens in the coming months?
Thank you. I will try to be brief, but before I answer your question, let me just reiterate a few things about what is happening in the West Bank. In my opinion, what we face is a systematic plan that was initiated since 1967, non-stop, by the Zionist movement. And I personally believe, I don't know if everybody would agree with me, but that you cannot be a Zionist and not be racist. And in particular, what we have been encountering in the West Bank is systematic fragmentation of the area, including the separation of Gaza from West Bank. And practically, Israel now has transformed through a system that includes building a separation wall, an apartheid wall, no less than 650 military checkpoints, and transforming the West Bank into no less than 224 small islands, which you could call small Bantustans, or like I would like to call them, ghetto-stans. And Gaza is the largest ghetto-stan in this case. But it is part of the same system of oppressive apartheid. Gaza has been under, of course, siege since 2006, which has led to the horrible humanitarian crisis that Dr. Bassem has described. Now, the Israelis think that they've reached a point where the balance of power is in their interest, and they have the backing of Mr. Trump, complete backing of the American administration, and they abuse the fact that there is internal Palestinian division and also that there is weak Arab support to the Palestinian people. And given all of that, they have practically exposed what they have planned all the time since 1967, which is the annexation of the West Bank. What they are talking about now is annexation of the Jordan Valley, as well as the northern part of the Dead Sea, and imposing Israeli law in Israeli settlements, which means practically annexing the settlements. That is not 30%. Practically, this can go up to 62% of the West Bank. That is the whole of what they call Area C. And without entering too much into the past, I must say that we are suffering here from a big mistake that was committed when Oslo Agreement was signed. It should not have been the case to accept to sign an agreement with Israel without insisting on complete and total freeze and elimination of settlement activities. But the mistake has happened, and the world community pressured Palestinians to accept Oslo Agreement, which created an illusion. The illusion was that we are in a situation of a compromise and that that Israel is accepting two-state solution. It's not true. In reality, what Israel has done, and especially Netanyahu, was to undermine the whole possibility of two-state solution consistently and continuously. Netanyahu, you hear him speak about negotiations, but actually he rejected every possibility of negotiations, whether organized by the French when they called for international conference or by Russians when they called for a meeting. So the practically negotiations were used as a cover for a process of annexation that was happening since they continued to build illegal settlements. Now, the plan is to annex, in my opinion, 62% of the West Bank. What would that mean? It would mean the end of the two-state solution. It would mean the end of the possibility of creating a Palestinian state. It would mean not imposing, because we already have the system of apartheid, but it would mean Israel declaring itself officially as a system of apartheid with two systems of laws for two people living in the same area. And that is the meaning of the Israeli state law or national law, which was passed in the Knesset, which says that the right of self-determination in Palestine, and the historic Palestine, which they call Eretz Israel, is exclusive for Israeli Jewish people, and that Palestinians have no right for self-determination. So, in my opinion, if annexation is allowed to happen, this would mean the end of the so-called two-state solution. And this would mean that we are heading towards a complete transition into a new stage where probably our struggle will have to transform to become a struggle to end the system of apartheid, not only in the occupied West Bank and Gaza Strip, but actually to end the system of apartheid in the whole area that is called historical Palestine. Because at this moment, the apartheid system is practiced against Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. It is practiced against Palestinian refugees who are not allowed to return to their home. And it is practiced against our brothers who live inside Israel. And although they carry Israeli citizenship, they are still subjected to the system of apartheid. That is a very serious matter. And in my opinion, we hear that many countries, especially European countries, are against this annexation, which could start, I'm sure it will start on the 1st of July. And for us, as we said today, we were in a demonstration in the Jordan Valley, and the Israeli army tried to stop us from reaching the place, but we managed to get there. And as was said there by all parties that participated, without exception, that one annexation of a settlement means a whole annexation. I mean, a small annexation does not exist. It means that the beginning of the process of full annexation has started. If the world community, and I'm directing this to Europe now, wants to stop that, they cannot only do statements and condemnations. That means nothing to Netanyahu, who wants to use the opportunity of coronavirus, COVID-19 pandemic. The world is very busy with that. He wants to use the fact that Trump is still there. He feels that he might lose the next elections. And he is relying on the fact that the majority of Israeli Jewish people support the annexation. So for him, this is a golden opportunity that he's trying to and going to try to use. The only thing that would deter him is Palestinian resistance and Palestinian unity, and the declaration of a unified Palestinian leadership that could lead a unified new strategy of struggle against the system of oppression and apartheid. But what would deter him is a decision by Europe, for instance, to impose sanctions on Israel. Europe cannot say they are for international law and that they support international law, while they still hesitate even to recognize the Palestinian state. I mean, those countries that haven't recognized Palestine. Sweden did, Iceland did, but many countries still hesitate. How can you speak about two-state solution while you recognize one state, which is Israel, that has not, by the way, identified its borders up till now, and you do not recognize Palestine? So there are two steps that would mean to Palestinians that Europe is serious. Immediate recognition by states who haven't yet recognized Palestine, of Palestinian state, but also declaring to Netanyahu that if he proceeds with annexation, there will be sanctions on Israel. I have been trying to reach out to the Irish government. I even called for, asked for a phone call with your foreign minister, whom I met in Ireland when we were advocating for the law that was passed by the Senate and by the Parliament to boycott Israeli settlement products. And we are very sorry that the new government in Ireland did not adopt that resolution of the Parliament, which should be a democratic action. And I think that Ireland should immediately implement that law, which was passed, and that says that there should be no relationship whatsoever with Israeli illegal settlements. I hope that I can get to talk to the foreign minister. I'm still waiting for that, because he then promised me that they will give it a time and then they will try to, if Israel continues the same path. I think Israel is exaggerating, actually, the path of annexation and apartheid. Thank you so much.
Mustafa, I'm sure that the Irish government is watching this broadcast tonight, as will other international governments, but your message has been very clearly articulated, what the expectation is of the Palestinian people in relation to Irish government action. I want to turn briefly to Bassem. We're running out of time. I want to turn briefly to Bassem to get your thoughts on the importance of international action. Bassem, what is required from the United Nations, what is required from the EU and from other foreign governments. And then I want to turn to all three contributors. I want to go back to Uri very, very briefly, and then to finish with yourself, Mustafa, with the message that you would like to give to the Irish people tonight at this point in time of your struggle. So can we turn to you to get your own thoughts from Gaza on what action is required from the international community at this time? Briefly, please.
Thank you very much again. First of all, I mentioned by my colleagues that what we see or what the government announced, the annexation of the 62% of Palestinian territories, 1st of July, it is not a new plan. It is the policy, continuous policy of Israeli government from extreme since 1967. 1967, first day, there was no settler on these areas. Now we are talking about 750,000 settlers and hundreds of what so-called legal and illegal settlements on Palestinian territories. Therefore, it is not a new policy. This is the vision of all Israeli governments. What is new? What Dr. Mustafa said, that they see that there is a golden chance, a historical moment to make a big step, which we consider as a third Nakba, by annexing the rest of the West Bank. No Israeli, no Zionist government see Israel as a state without the West Bank. The former, sorry, I have forgotten his name. He said Israel has at no time worked for peace. At no time was planned to reach peace with the Palestinians. Anyway, this is the one point. They see a historical moment by the presence of Trump. The whole world is busy with COVID-19, the division of Palestinians, the weakness of Arabs, and so on and so on. The second thing is we Palestinians, since 1948, now more than 72 years, we have heard hundreds of UN resolution, AU resolution statements, press releases. We are fed up of rhetoric. We are fed up of words and empty words. We are looking for actions without, as Dr. Mustafa said, all these statements, Netanyahu considered it as a collateral damage. He can deal with this. Okay, he progressed forward. He is changing reality unilaterally on the ground. Therefore, without actions, real actions to stop this progress, we cannot expect any change in the Israeli policies. But I have to say here, initiating this process is a fatal mistake for Israel, for any chance of a political solution of this conflict, and for the two-state solution. It will destabilize the situation not only in Palestine, but in Palestine, in the whole region, and maybe at the international level. For millions of people, the Palestinian cause, the Palestinian struggle, is still a central issue. You cannot expect quietness if this policy proceed. Therefore, they will initiating a new round of violence. They will destroy any chance of a two-state solution. They are liquidating our dreams of an independent state of dignity, of freedom. No one can expect that the Palestinians will skip any tool available to resist these plans. Even of organizations or factions or governments here in Gaza or in Ramallah or anywhere, you can expect from any Palestinian who see that his land, olive trees, resources are stolen, he will defend himself by all means. Therefore, no one can accuse the Palestinians that they are responsible for destabilizing the situation. If the international community really serious to defend the two-state solution or a political solution for this conflict, if it is feasible, they have to take action. Therefore, I have to say, I appreciate and strongly appreciate the efforts of Irish people generally along the last decades of supporting our struggle. But we are expecting actions. Like Dr. Mustafa said, at least a clear message to Israel that there are going to be sanctions at all levels, diplomatic, politically, and economically, and culturally, on Israel if they proceed with these policies. I cannot believe what I hear from press releases when I see last week the AU is giving the Israelis or approving $170 million for the Israeli government to build the biggest water desalination plant. If you revise the what's so-called Horizon 2020 project, which is a common project, joint project by all European countries, including Israel, Israel got millions of euros supporting IDF projects, Israeli military, research in the military field, settlements and companies inside the settlements. Therefore, how can I believe the Europeans or the international community when I see very nice words in press releases, press conferences, UN resolutions, but on the ground they are supporting this colonial apartheid regime. Therefore, we are waiting for actions. The recognition, a clear message to the Israelis that if you proceed forward, we are going, the Irish government, the European governments, we are going to recognize the state of Palestine. And I have to remember everyone, when the state of Israel, what's so-called Israel, what was recognized 72 years ago, it was conditioned with two conditions: the recognition of a Palestinian state and the right of return of Palestinians to their homeland where they were forcefully expelled. I mean, even the state of Israel at the level of international law, it is conditionally recognized by recognizing the state of Palestine and the return of Palestinians. How can I recognize a state when they are still not recognizing the right of Palestinians of an independent state, of freedom, of dignity, of right of return? Again, I think they are destabilizing the situation. They are initiating a new round of violence. Palestinians will not keep silent. They will resist by all means. No one is excluded. Even Gaza, they cannot simply looking silently when they see that Jerusalem is Judized and the whole West Bank is annexed. Or maybe next week we will see a clear letter or message from the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Israel for UNRWA to leave the area annexed, because this is an Israeli territory and they cannot work in these areas, which means keeping hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees without a legal and political cover. I mean, this is a new ethnic cleansing, a third Nakba, and Palestinians will resist this by all means available, diplomatically and all the way. Therefore, I hope we will see actions in.
Thank you, Basim. That's very clear. We've run out of time, but Uri, I want to give you an opportunity just in 30 seconds. What is your message to the Irish people who are watching this broadcast tonight?
I think a unified message from the different angles of the people here participating is very clear to the Irish people and beyond. One, recognize the state of Palestine, and at least in my terminology, recognize the sovereignty of the state of Palestine. And once that is recognized, Israeli measures, apartheid and annexation measures are an invasion into the territory of a sovereign state, and they come under international law sanctions. And the correlative message is, please implement sanctions against Israel, both in the relating to the post-67 occupied territories, as well as to so-called Israel proper itself. The emphasis may be different, but both sanctions, both BDS measures, boycott, divestment, and sanctions are a unified voice coming out of this platform, and recognition of the state of Palestine, which for me means recognition of the sovereignty of the state of Palestine and identify Israeli policies as an invasion are clearly come out of this forum. And I wish to thank you and the Sinn Féin for all this event.
Thank you, Uri, and thank you for taking part. Last word to you, Mustafa.
Thank you, Declan. I want to thank you also and thank Sinn Féin for organizing this wonderful opportunity. And I want to say that maybe if you ask Palestinians, the closest people they feel to are probably the Irish people and the people of South Africa. In the sense that we do realize that our struggle is similar to your struggle against colonialism, against discrimination. And it is definitely similar to the struggle of the South African people against apartheid. We appreciate your support. I know how much the Irish people are supportive of Palestinians. We feel that. And we want you to understand that what we are struggling against here is not only occupation and the system of apartheid. We are also struggling against Trump's plan, the so-called the deal of the century. It's not a deal of the century. It's the deceit of the century. That's how it should be called. And we will continue this struggle. We actually consider our struggle today against racism as part of what we see globally now, which I call a global revolution against racism, whether it is against the oppression of black people in the States or against the oppression of immigrants in Europe, etc. What I want people to understand in Ireland is that we, the Palestinians, wanted peace and want peace. We did everything to achieve peace. We made such a huge concession by accepting a little tiny state in less than half of what United Nations decided we should have. But it is the Israeli governments that are killing that dream. So for us, we want freedom, we want justice, we want democracy, and we want our rights to be like other people in this world, whether in a Palestinian independent state or if they don't want in one state solution with full and equal democratic rights for everybody. But one thing that the world should understand, and I am sure our Irish friends understand, we, the Palestinians, will never, ever accept to be slaves of occupation or a system of apartheid. We will struggle for freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Mustafa. And in conclusion, I want to thank our audience who have joined us tonight. A very, very clear and powerful message has come from this broadcast from representatives of three of the largest political forces, representative of the Palestinian struggle for national democracy, and that is to the government here in Ireland and to Irish citizens to support and enact implementation of recognition of the state of Palestine, implementation of the Occupied Territories Bill. The Irish state now has a seat on the UN Security Council. Quite clearly, the message from Palestine live tonight is that the Irish government must now act decisively to uphold Palestinian national and humanitarian rights. There is another very powerful message for Irish citizens watching this broadcast tonight, and that is that your people face the third great Nakba, with the intended annexation planned to commence on the 1st of July. And Irish civic society must now mobilise with as much energy as we can to do our best to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people and to oppose the planned annexation of your country. Mustafa Barghouti, Uri Davis, Bassem Naim, all of you calling in tonight from the West Bank and from Gaza, we thank you for your time. We thank you for your contributions. We appreciate your perspective, and be assured that all right-thinking Democrats on the island of Ireland stand in solidarity with you, and you can be assured of the continued solidarity of the Sinn Féin party, both north and south of our island. Shukran. Take care and stay safe.
Shukran. Thank you very much. Thank you.